Over 80 episodes later, and we're into season 9. With my guests, we'll be diving into all things leadership, teamwork, engagement, mental wellbeing, and high performance. We have the conversations that really matter, that put the human factor back into business, because we know that when we get people right, we get business right. If you want to find out more about how to develop an experience that brings out the best in people, get in touch. I'm your host, Lisa, psychologist and psychotherapist and founder of It's Time for Change. Thank you for joining me on Beyond the Water Cooler. The 18th of October is Menopause Awareness Day, and so today I'm welcoming Tammy G to join my conversation about the menopause, but it's specifically in relation to leadership and women in leadership. So thank you for joining me, Tammy.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me. I'm very excited to talk about this side of the subject.
Yeah, I think it'll be good because I think, well, you and I have chatted a number of times about this particular area, and I think we hear a lot now, or there's a lot more being talked about around the menopause in the workplace, which is a good thing. I'm seeing lots of different workshops and so on around, what the menopause is and how it can affect people and so on. But there isn't so much, or I haven't come across so much that's specifically sort of drilling down into the area of women in leadership. And you, with your background, you're a nutritionist with a specialism in perimenopause and menopause. So you are going to be in a great space to be able to help me think a bit more about that specific area. So tell us a little bit more, Tammy, about why you became interested in the perimenopause and menopause and nutrition, and how that came about, what your role looks like.
Yeah. So I think also for me, I have a corporate background and I qualified as a nutritionist. I was offered the chance actually in my role. I was working for about 10 years in the corporate side of health and wellbeing and different roles around operations and heading up contact centres, things like that. So then I was offered the chance to qualify as a nutritionist. And at the time, I was launching a quality program and looking at how we can improve the conversations we had with customers in a head office scenario around contact centres. And so I was offered that chance around the age of 39.
Mm-hmm.
And it was crazy to think that I said, yeah, I'll study for 4 years whilst working and solo parenting and all of those things. But once I started, I was completely hooked. All of this information that I had about nutrition, lifestyle, about supporting our body that we aren't taught as women. And I'd had my son at 35. At 37, I started to have perimenopause symptoms. Everybody in my friend group was still having babies. It wasn't on any, the menopause was not talked about. We were not thinking about it at all as a friend group, and I went to the GP and the experience was no support. And one GP actually said to me, I will eat my hat if it's anything to do with hormones, which is crazy in the fact that, hormones are controlling so much in our body. So yeah, completely left in the dark about what I was going to do about these symptoms that I was getting. And so the fact that I was studying then nutrition, lifestyle, and how I could support my body, what for me was a lifesaver. I'm 50 now, and I still haven't hit the official 12 months mark of menopause. So I've had a really long perimenopause stage. And so that would have been a long time of feeling very, very lost in a workplace, in my home life, in my health and well-being. So I have a real connection with helping women to manage this stage with lots of tools, lots of support within themselves, alongside, advising what can be out there um, medically. Um, but it's such an all-encompassing thing. It affects
Mm.
physical, emotional, mental, relationships, social life, everything. So I think it's important to look at it in all of those stages.
And we're not going to go into the detail today of um, menopause and how the symptoms and so on, but only because we haven't got time to.
Yeah.
But but what might be really helpful, Tammy, is for you to just almost give us maybe a summary. So people who haven't had chance to learn a little bit more about it or who are beginning to now think about it a little bit more, either for themselves or perhaps their colleagues
Yeah.
or family. Can you just give us a kind of high level overview of firstly the difference between perimenopause and menopause, and perhaps some of the key or some of the main symptoms that um, might be most relevant for people in the workplace, perhaps some of the ones that are less known about, but that can have a really big impact. So obviously, people talk a lot about hot flushes and so on, but there's a whole heap of other stuff
Yeah.
that really can impact on how someone is feeling and performing at work. So yeah, can we kick off there? That would be really
Yeah. Okay. So I talked about this official stage of menopause. So officially, menopause is the point at which you haven't had a period for 12 months. But obviously, your periods don't just stop and that's it. It's not like estrogen kind of drops. It's not steadily dropping to the point of our period stopping. It's a bit like this. It's on a
mm,
bit of a roller coaster. Um, so perimenopause is the stage before that when our hormones are changing, affecting our estrogen, our progesterone. Throughout the cycle, it makes our cycles change. We can start to have symptoms before we get to that official menopause stage. And I think people still talk about menopause symptoms and probably are talking about perimenopause symptoms.
mm,
But those symptoms can last a little bit after the official menopause date. And then we're talking about menopause and post menopause. So, really, menopause is only that day that you hit 12 months of no periods. And then
mm,
you're into post menopause territory. And before that, you're in perimenopause territory. And some of the most common symptoms, I mean, when we think about menopause, we probably think about hot flushes. Not everybody has hot
mm,
flushes. But there can be irregularities to periods. Periods might become really heavy, more frequent, which can be difficult to manage if we're in the workplace. Our sleep might become affected. So we're not getting enough sleep, or we feel like we're not rested when we wake up from sleeping. So it's already a trudge to start the day
mm,
when our sleep has been disturbed. There can be changes to the way that we look, our appearance, which can affect our confidence. We might start to have symptoms of anxiety or low mood. And some women describe this feeling of just plain meh, like
mm.
all the joy has gone. And that's really difficult to turn up in your job as a leader, motivating people, being enthusiastic for people, being optimistic for people.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, there's so many different ways that it can affect what's going on for us in our work. Um, and then the brain fog is a big one as well. So that can cause anxiety in itself because we feel like, oh, what have I forgotten? What am I
Mm.
missing? Have I remembered? So there's all this extra layer of work that we're putting on ourselves, an expectation that we're putting on ourselves to manage what we would have seen as a walk in the park maybe 6 months ago. And then it's all of a sudden hitting us that this is feeling a bit overwhelming. There's
Mm.
lots of stuff going on that's making this what I would have found every day really challenging.
And I think it's really interesting because I mean everything you've just described, and I hear um, people talking about all these different symptoms, and some people talk about it quite openly, the brain fog and the anxiety and so on, and other people less so. But in terms of in business environment where there is so much focus now on well-being and people being able to thrive and so on, do you think businesses are really understanding what we mean by that term thrive? And and when we think about well-being, it's what are you seeing in terms of that kind of connection between people being able to thrive in their workplace and the menopause or perimenopause or postmenopause, as you just
Yeah,
described?
menopause as a whole.
As a whole.
Um, I think particularly menopause is challenging around this subject because every different menopause is pretty unique. When you start to have your symptoms, how severe those symptoms are, the types of symptoms that you have, how long they last for, how they change throughout the course of your perimenopause may be different from person to person. And so it's really difficult to put in place a one thing that's going to support menopause in the workplace for everyone. And if we're talking about everybody thriving, that's everybody's individual needs being met. And that is tricky, isn't it? When you want to put a program in place, or you've got a budget for well-being and you've got to spend it in a way that gives the most benefit to the most people. How do you capture everybody that's got all these different symptoms and they're going through different things? So I think presuming that a menopause workshop or a menopause program is the answer can be the first hurdle or the first downfall, in that can you get people together and talk about what they really need, what would really help? Because for some, it's about just having a space to talk and to share experiences. That is so powerful. When women are going through these changes, they can often not trust what's going on with their own body. So just sharing and having that space can be really powerful. That's tricky, isn't it? If you
Mm.
think that as a leader that you can't share your vulnerable things or
Mm.
the things that are happening to you or those things that you are worried people are going to think differently about you if you share this. So where does that support come from for you?
Mm.
So it's a really tricky one to answer.
I think it's what that's making me think of is this whole kind of focus on authenticity, which is something I talk a huge amount about, and I support lots of people with how to be authentic in
Yeah,
our leadership roles.
yeah,
And it's all very well saying, talking about we want authentic employees, but actually, how well are we supporting that in terms of people being able to um, be honest about how they're feeling and the anxiety that can go with um, worrying about how they are feeling and how they're showing up. So, you know, I've observed a number of female leaders who are consumed by anxiety at times. Perhaps they've already got some degree of imposter syndrome because particularly in some organizations I can think of where it's very male dominated and they're having to prove that they are have this that sense of status and that they need to be listened to and taken seriously. And suddenly they're halfway through saying something and they can't remember the rest of the sentence, or it's this kind of internal narrative around, am I saying the right thing, or I've forgotten that particular fact, or something I was going to reference, and all that stuff just creates that mental noise, which adds to that sense of anxiety. And I think there's definitely a real connection there between, people saying one thing in terms of we want you to thrive, we want you to be authentic, and actually enabling that because we really understand, going back to your really good point, Tammy, about how it's different for everyone.
Yeah. How how do we allow how do we allow women that, like you say, it's got all of that background stuff going on.
Mm,
They're fighting for their place at the table. They believe that they have to work harder than their male counterparts to prove their worth. And then you've got these symptoms that are knocking your confidence, knocking your self-esteem, making you feel like you can't find the word.
mm,
Um, and how honest can you be in that scenario? Now, I've talked to some colleagues at some organisations where colleagues feel really happy to talk about, you know, today I am not going to be as quick as I usually am at answering the question, but I will come back with an answer. It might have to be by email because I'm going to be able to construct what I want to say with a little bit of time on the keyboard better than just saying it here.
mm.
Um, I've had other leaders that have said to me they've been in a meeting with their boss and tears running down their face. And they've said, just carry on talking. This is nothing. This is just what's happening for me right now. No reason, no cause. What you're saying is not the reason I'm crying. So carry on with what you're talking to. I'm going to make some notes. I might have to come back to you with what responses to some of those things. But yeah, keep talking.
Mm,
Which, I mean, how that is such a big thing, isn't it? That you've got to say that and you've got to say those things. You've got to admit that this is a bad day.
mm,
Um, and I think also, as women, we are used to working in a cycle. Our hormones change throughout the cycle. And we know at some points of those cycle when our estrogen is higher, we're more outgoing, we're more confident. That's the day to have the big presentation when we're ovulating.
yeah.
And at the other times of our cycle, when progesterone is rising, that's the calming hormone. And there's the days that we're super good at planning the detail. Nothing's going to get past us on that day. We can, get through all those admin tasks that we need to fire through. But I think generally we see that as a weakness, that it's not a constant being.
Mm,
And actually, if we talk to men, and there's some great institutions and workshops out there where talking groups for men, asking them what they are to score their mood, their day out of 10. And it's never going to be the same number. Some days it's a 3, some days it's a 9.
mm,
But we think that because we've got this fluctuation, which might affect our mood, it might affect our, how quick we are to be irritated with people, or that we see it as a weakness.
mm,
And it's absolutely not. It means we've got this wide breadth of, ways to deal with situations. And we've got this underlying kind of skill to manage all of these situations and all of these tasks. And we don't have to be a constant. We can
but
have bad days,
yeah.
days where we just need to be at home doing the admin, and days when we're more outgoing.
Mm.
And that is okay.
And I think it's more than okay. I think it's
Yeah.
it's it's really tapping into strengths and
Yeah.
knowing that we have different strengths that shine at different times of the month. And rather than actually this is me and I'm quite constant, actually, if you're able to be self-aware and imagine being able to plan your schedule around when you're going to be outgoing and great at kind of performing or communicating, and then the times when you need to just have a bit more of your own space and do some more of the detail and the planning, being able to kind of ebb and flow and being able to respond in a way that is utilizing your strengths at different times
Yeah.
is so powerful. I mean, you've got so much more to give when people can tap into that as a resource.
Yeah, absolutely. And, work life, we're not always going to have to be able to schedule the presentation around, what's happening for us. But we'll always pull that strength
Mm.
out. And of course, after menopause, post menopause, we haven't got that fluctuation quite as much. We've got a more steady, and we do hit kind of the new normal for the
Mm.
settings of our hormones. And that may be whether that's with HRT or not. Um, so we can dig into, feeling really authentic of that this is my my sort of new normal, and really feel the strength of that. So there
Mm.
are positives as
Mm.
well to the menopause, and we don't have to talk about it as a negative narrative all the time. So there are positives to coming out
Mm.
the other side and feeling the strength of, I've gone through that and I'm coming out the other side, really knowing what I need to support my body and what I need to be the person that I want to turn up as every
Mm.
day.
And what you're describing is really about kind of that confidence, that self-awareness,
Yeah,
that level of confidence, that being very intentional. And I think when people can master that,
yeah,
they are in a really great
yeah,
place. And it's such a big hurdle for so many people. I know when I've been part of leadership team meetings and events, and you know, often there are more men than women in those situations in the majority of the organizations I work in. And then when I'm having individual coaching sessions afterwards, if I'm coaching some of the leaders, one of the things that comes up most for the women is how I'm showing up in the boardroom, or how I'm showing up with my colleagues when I'm really trying to be clear-headed and communicate clearly, and actually it's the confidence bit. It's that really is the bit that kind of undermines them using their strengths and being able to do what they do brilliantly, because they've got this kind of inner voice gnawing away at them in terms of how are other people seeing me? How have I got to perform? It's a tricky one.
yeah. It is really tricky. And, I describe this cycle that we go through on a monthly basis, but then in perimenopause, we're feeling like that cycle is like driving us nuts. We don't know where we are with it. So that's another layer of how can I turn up showing, I suppose the best of what I want to show. And actually, I feel like, I don't know what the hell that is right now, because
Yeah.
what the hell is going on with my hormones?
Yeah.
What's the hell going on with my brain? What's going on with my body? Um, and so that is the tricky piece, isn't it? That
Yeah.
is the difficult conversation.
Mm.
And how willing is your organization to have that difficult conversation?
The impact of not being able to talk openly and being able to communicate, and um, having those conversations in the boardroom is essentially that people will leave, I'm guessing, potentially.
Yeah, absolutely. So if somebody can't have that difficult conversation, what are their options? If they feel that those symptoms are affecting how they turn up for work, what what are they going to start thinking? And if we think about, women are more likely to jump to the conclusion of, I'm not doing well enough, I'm not doing a good job, even though they're turning up and they're still performing and they're still, completing their work. They've got all this stuff on that's making them think I'm not doing a good enough job. And there's some horrendous stats around women leaving the workplace at this time. 1 in 10, around one menopause survey, said that they left work because of the effect of their symptoms. So there then is this big band of leadership teams that are, there's a big gap of women leaving around this age. And I've talked to organisations where they've noticed this band, and they, DEI sort of departments are looking at the figures, looking at the data, and saying, why have we got this gap of middle management or leadership teams where women have left the business? And even when they look into it a little bit further and they look at exit interviews, there's no mention of menopause symptoms. But they can't say for definitely it's around that, but it's that age band. So they've got to start thinking about, how are they supporting people going through that stage? Are they, what else can they do?
Mm. And I think it's really interesting. It goes back almost to that point you made earlier about it is unique for everyone. And so I think most of what I do, um, wearing my various hats and going into companies is around, rather than having a program that's supposed to have one approach to doing, ticking that box, let's kind of scrap that. And whether we're talking about the menopause or we're talking about mental health or anything else, is actually getting to know your individual employees
Yeah,
and getting to know your team, the people around you, and knowing what's going on for them, regardless of what it's to do with. So whether it's to do with their family, whether it's to do with their mental health, whether it's to do with something to do with their hormones, whatever it might be, what's going on for them and what do they need. And when you bring it down to that level, it simplifies the whole conversation, because the number of managers I hear who have a real fear of talking to employees about menopause or mental health or anything else that is not there in their comfort zone, or they
yeah,
don't feel very knowledgeable about, or have an experience. Their fear is, what do I say? Like, I just don't know what to say. And I had a conversation yesterday with someone whose really good friend has just lost her mother unexpectedly. And my friend said, I don't know what to say to her. And you don't have to, it's not about finding the right words. It's just showing that you're there to want to understand a little bit more about how someone is feeling and ask them what they need. And
yeah,
and if you break it down to that's a starting point, it shows people have the right intention, that they care and they want to support, they want to understand, and
yeah,
they want to do the right thing, but without just having that simple conversation, breaking it down to that starting point, we can have the best program in place that's supposed to tick all these whizzy boxes. But
yeah,
if you haven't got those relationships and that ability to talk authentically and to be, just be myself, and talk about what's getting in the way of me feeling okay today or performing in the way that I want to perform today, we're not going to get very far.
absolutely. And you've made some really great points there, because there is such a combination of things going on, and mental health can be part of that.
Mm,
Um, so some of the stats, around 69% of women going through perimenopause and menopause will suffer from anxiety, low mood, depression. So mental health is part of that picture. And so if you liken that, or, if somebody's going through a tough time, whether that's mental health, menopause, grief, a serious health condition, how do you approach that conversation? Um, and there's lots of work being done around mental health in the workplace. and there's lots of conversation about menopause in the workplace. But on a one-to-one basis, starting a conversation about, you know, menopause symptoms or somebody that you've noticed a change in them,
Mm,
how can you start that conversation is really important. I think a big part of what we're talking about is trust and compassion. So, compassionate conversations. That doesn't mean that you're the expert in all of these fields. You can't be an expert in how to help somebody through grief, how to help somebody in if they're having difficulties with mental health. And you don't have to be an expert on women's health and menopause symptoms, but you're opening a conversation that is listening to what's going on for somebody and how that's affecting them, if they want to talk about it, and whether they need any support to help them be able to come to work and feel like they're valued and supported.
mm,
And so to do that, for somebody to be able to be able to talk about what's going on for them and to really be able to ask for the support that they need to trust that it's okay to talk to you about their well-being and trust that they can tell you that some days are not good, but you're not going to think that they are not able to do their job. So
mm,
trust and compassion, I think it's super important to be part of that
mm,
conversation. And that's a cultural thing, isn't it? That might be about the relationship you have with your direct reports. Um, but if you're in an organization that the culture is, you get on with it, you get your head down, and you get your job done,
mm.
how can they sort of trust that, yes, they might have a good relationship with the person they're talking to, but outside of that bubble, they're going to be viewed differently.
Yeah, and I think, those points you just made about trust and compassion are so vital because it gets them beyond, the care washing that we see about where organizations are talking the talk, but they're not really, some organizations spend a huge amount of money on um, doing stuff which actually isn't really impacting because it hasn't got the fundamental foundations, if you like, of the trust and of compassionate conversations. And so much, as you say, is part of our culture. It's, how we relate to each other here, and how we are, what we're experiencing, and that goes way beyond um a sort of an initiative, if you like, which and a lot, and there's not dismissing those kind of programs or initiatives as being wasteful, because people are doing it with goodwill, in terms of like, we're wanting this to make a difference, we want to take it seriously, we want to do something. And it's that usual thing I say a lot, where people don't really know what the right thing is.
Yeah,
um so they'll grab something that comes up and run with it, and unfortunately lots of people don't evaluate what they
yeah,
do. Um so not necessarily as impactful as it could be. But when you take it back to the basics of thinking about more generally how we communicate and how we relate to each other, again, it just brings it back to, these are core values and core behaviors that if we get those right,
yeah,
it actually addresses lots of different needs for lots of different individuals going through lots of different things, whether you're male, female, whatever's going on for you. It's you feel you've got a voice and you're going to be supported. There's going to be some empathy.
yeah, yeah. And how powerful is that? If you feel that you have a voice in the organization that you work for, that you're listened to, you're supported, um, and how much that will encourage you to be engaged with what you're with what you're doing, to be part of the purpose and the mission of the organization. Um, there's so much to offering that support and it
Mm,
being there and it being offered, because it's not just about, you could look at that in the black and white of, retention and the cost of replacing people if they leave, and the, just that loss of knowledge and skill. But then you're looking at, the duty of care to people. And I think things have changed since the pandemic. And I don't want to use the pandemic, the C word, but things have changed drastically for well-being in workplace since the pandemic.
mm,
And people are more willing to talk about their well-being thing. And
mm,
they expect a little bit more from the organization to support their well-being. And even, some of the stats around people are looking, they're choosing their employer through what support can be offered for their well-being.
mm.
It's become such a major part of what we think about now.
Particularly future generations, in
Yeah,
terms of, I was working with a group of graduates last week, and it's almost taken for granted that, well, of course, we're going to shape our days around how we perform best, which is going to mean it's kind of, we integrate some of our outside of work activities during the work day, because what is a work day and how does that look? And I know I'm self-aware, and I know what I need, and I'm happy to communicate that. So
yeah,
workplaces are definitely having to adjust with the range of generations showing up.
yeah, absolutely. And then if you are a woman in leadership, that's definitely going to be part of what you're thinking about, isn't it?
Mm,
How am I going to support it through my life stages?
mm,
And that goes from, sort of fertility and pregnancy, if you're going to have children, but every woman is going to
mm,
go through menopause, whether
mm,
that's, they have symptoms that are severe or not. It's a guaranteed stage of life.
mm,
So yeah, that is definitely part of um, what organisations need to think about around well-being. But there's the other side of it, it's the legal side of it as well, because women are protected by the Equality Act, disability discrimination, health and safety at work. They're all already legislation that's in place that supports women going through menopause and some of the symptoms, severe symptoms that can happen because of that. And then there's the new government legislations that are talking about, you know, companies over a certain size have to have a menopause policy type document. It's always kind of you could, if you wanted to, kind of scenario before. It's becoming more sort of, this is what we expect. And, reasonable adjustments for flexible working or for the environment being, whether that's ventilation or access to cold water, or having some quiet rooms, restrooms, those kind of things are becoming, absolutely expected, no
mm.
question.
So what would be, so in terms of that then, because I can imagine some people listening to this thinking, crumbs, I got to now start thinking about reasonable adjustments. So I really need to get to know what it is that people need, which
Yeah,
goes back to having the good conversations. So if you took it right back to the start of having that conversation, do you have advice, Tammy, about how to start that conversation? So if I've got people, if people are listening to this thinking, maybe I should start talking to my leadership colleagues, or maybe I'm a manager and I need to talk to my team, start having some conversations with them, but I don't really know how to start, like what I should say in terms of being able to, I don't want to ask, are you going through the menopause? I don't want to ask you straight out. So if you haven't opened up to me, because if you've opened up to me, that's great. And I can thank you for trusting me and to talk to me openly.
yeah,
And I hear what you're saying. And what is it I can do that would be most helpful. So it's a really kind of, that's a nice easier way in. If
Yeah,
someone's not volunteering that, going back to your example earlier about some people are just leaving because they don't feel that they can open up and necessarily get the support,
yeah.
what how could a manager potentially start that kind of conversation in a one-to-one to show that they care, they're interested?
I think it's generally get to know what the organisation has to offer resource wise for wellbeing, because you might not have a menopause program as such, but likely to have an EAP program. You might have, some private healthcare. You might have a digital health type service, which are definitely going to be helpful.
Mm.
All of those things are already going to be helpful, even if they're not labelled as menopause support. And so I think thinking about, opening the conversation around these are the resources generally for everybody that are available for wellbeing. Have you heard about these? Do you know about these? Signposting to things. And maybe that's going to start the conversation.
Mm.
It's a little bit trickier. Maybe you've noticed a difference, or you've noticed somebody withdrawing, not being as social. Maybe you've noticed a change in their performance. So that might be the reason that the conversation's happening. So you can't ask outright, are things changing because, you go through the menopause? Of course you can't say that. But you can invite a more general conversation about their well-being. What do they want to talk to you about? What's going on for you? You've noticed a change. And that's okay if they don't want to talk about it, but you're there to talk to them if they do want to talk about it.
Mm. And that's, hearing you describe it like that kind of takes the fear out of it,
Yeah,
which is important. Um, because I guess we need to, talk, being able to have the conversations demonstrates that I'm a leader who cares, and I care about my peers on my team. It says a lot about our culture. It's about how we do things here. It's getting beyond the I'm here in my role, which is the kind of technical side of my role, but I'm here because I'm relating to people, and I'm here because I care about you as a human being. And I was about to say the whole person, but there's a lot of conversation now around, should we bring our whole self to work or should we not bring our whole self to work? Um,
should we have
but
some boundaries?
yeah, have some
Boundaries
boundaries.
are okay.
Some boundaries are really important. Um, but yes, I guess it's about, this is all part of, we talked earlier about thriving, what the thriving really means, and people talk about workplace culture. This is all part of your work culture, like just
Yeah,
how you are empowering people to speak up and to be themselves and to communicate what it is that they need in that moment or during that day, or that period of time, in order to be able to thrive or perform in my best way possible now.
yeah,
So, and not trying to ace it, like be 100% all the time, because no one is. But that sense of, for me to be at my best given the circumstances, this is what I need. And I think when we start to bring it down to that kind of, again, that personal human level, it takes the overwhelm out of hearing terms like reasonable adjustments and
yeah,
policies and everything. It all makes it all very formal. And actually, a real fan of just doing things because it's the right thing to do, because we care, rather than we have to because of the legislation. Although obviously having the legislation there is super
yeah,
important.
yeah. And talking about culture, okay, we're talking about the one-to-one level, but is it the well-being running through the veins of the organization? Is that what the culture is? So how
You're,
many times can we have that conversation? How many times can we have a conversation about well-being that really embeds that well-being is part of our culture, and that maybe give people the confidence to talk about what their well-being needs are.
mm,
So is it part of weekly meetings? Is it part of onboarding? Is it part of, you know, communication at some point? Lots of different channels of communication. You know, is there more than one person that you can talk to about your well-being? Because you might not want to tell your line manager that all the things that are going on, but you might want to tell somebody in HR. You might
mm,
want to tell a well-being champion. You might want to tell, you know, sort of a menopause kind of person that's been allocated that space. And I think also with wellbeing programs, no matter how much you think you're banging on about them, somebody will be sitting in the organization saying, oh, I didn't know we got that. I didn't
yeah.
know I could use that. I didn't know we got that. So just keep talking about it, keep reiterating that these things are here to support you.
Mm. Really, really important that variety of channels. And um, I mean, the whole reason this podcast is called Beyond the Water Cooler, because, the good old days when we used to have water coolers in the office and people would end up bumping into people there and talking about how they're feeling. Like, it's just because it's very easy, it's very natural. I'm not in a formal meeting with my manager doing a one-to-one,
Yeah,
just grabbing a drink and we talk about, we just have a joke. It's almost quite relaxed in terms of this is how I'm feeling, or you're never going to guess what's just happened, or
yeah,
and then you suddenly realize that other people are experiencing the same, or it suddenly normalizes a lot of what's going on. And I think I never cease to be amazed at how much people go through, they carry with them,
yeah,
and they think it is just them, and that weighs heavy. And as soon as we can normalize that for all sorts of different reasons, people are struggling in different ways at different times, it just takes the pressure off in terms of I'm not the only one who gets midway through a sentence and then forgets what I'm saying, or feels like I'm embarrassing myself in my leadership meetings because I've given some wrong data or I can't recall something. All that stuff is so important, isn't it? Just to be able to create the right opportunities for people to be able to find a way of that fits them to share and connect with other people about what's going on.
yeah, yeah. You know that, you're part of that organization because they recognize your talent, your experience, your skills, and they value that. And it's very easy when you go through all this stuff and life's throwing all this stuff at you. Your seems to be getting involved as well, to forget that they value what you bring.
Mm,
And that doesn't have to be all singing, all dancing every single day. The underlying, you've got the knowledge that helps you make those decisions. You've got that experience that knows that that's the route to take. And that's there underneath that, all the stuff that's going on.
mm. It's almost like you can show up being 80% of your,
Yeah,
or even 60% of your normal self at
yeah,
particular times, and you still it's good enough for that
yeah,
period in time. So
yeah,
important.
yeah, absolutely.
So one thing we haven't touched on, and I know it's something you are interested in, is that connection between, we talked a lot today about listening, and having good conversations. So if we're listening to our employees' needs or our colleagues' needs, is there a link between that and listening to our customers' needs?
Yeah, isn't that a great link? Because do we like brands or do we think about brands and how they treat their employees, the culture of that brand? I think there's some brands that we could definitely think about that we think, yeah, that's a culture, that's the culture of their workplace and
Mm.
their whole business. Um, and I think there's definitely a link. I think there's definitely a link because if we are able to be think about listening to what our customers are telling us. I mean, of course we would do that.
Mm.
Looking at maybe the data of what our customers are telling us. And we can do the same things, sort of, we've talked about the personalized individual approach, but that as an organization, we can look at the HR data about what is needed for people in their, and their well-being and what support is needed. We can listen to what they're telling us they need as support. They're super important for employees as well as our customers.
Mm. Yeah, and I think when people make that link,
Yeah,
again, it brings everything together. I talk a lot about joining dots. It just joins the dots. Um, and when you describe it how you just have, it's really obvious.
yeah,
And it's, a lot of stuff that needs to happen isn't rocket science, but it's almost creating the space for people to take a step back and go, what do we actually need to do to ask that question that is for the people within our organization, our customers. Let's take a step back and actually look at where those natural connections are, and how, if we're doing this for this group of people over here, actually it's a similar thing to what this other group of people
yeah,
is relevant for them. I think one of the things that gets in the way for people being able to step back and observe and reflect and intentionally engage with the data and experience is just people are so under pressure, they're so
yeah,
overwhelmed that people don't have the space. It's like I'm just got my head down and I'm consumed with these demands that are being made of me, and I don't have the ability to press the pause button and actually pull myself out to look at the bigger picture. And that's one of the, I think, the biggest barriers actually to all this, to the conversations that need to happen, to noticing people are showing up in a slightly different way to normal, and do I need to check in with them, and all the really important stuff that we've talked about today is the stuff that I see slipping off the
yeah,
kind of, it's not a to-do list, because it shouldn't be on a list. It should be just the way we are, the way we show up and connect with people. But it's the stuff that goes first when we are under pressure. And I think that is part of a bigger problem
yeah, yeah,
around workload and overwhelm, that feeling of burnout, and people don't have the capacity to think about being human.
yeah. If you think about, I talk to quite a few people in leadership roles where they are almost feel a little bit resentful that well-being is another thing on their list. It's another thing that they are needing to do, possibly no support, no training. They That's missing part of the equation. So
Mm.
there are, we've talked about workshops might not be the answer, but certainly if workshops around not being the expert, but some knowledge around certain things. How do you have like a toolkit pack, a really easy to reference? These are the resources available if you're having a difficult conversation for leaders.
Mm.
Writing. Um, I help organisations to write guides, menopause guides, and I would always recommend that there's one for colleagues and one for leaders. So it's a really quick reference. If I'm worried about starting a conversation, these are some little points. This is the basics of what menopause is about and some of the common symptoms that might be talked about. And this is the toolkit that your organization has for you to signpost to.
Mm,
And actually, if you're really worried as a leader about having that conversation, you can just have the guide in your hand and talk through it together.
mm.
Um, because you don't have to know it all. You don't have to be the expert. You definitely don't have to be the expert.
And I like that, talk through it with them. So it's not, because again, I've seen people do this really badly where they'll grab a kind of guide of some description to guide them through a conversation. And it's almost like they hide it away behind the notepad or behind the clipboard. It almost
Yeah,
feels like a clipboard. And it's like, I'm going to treat it as a script, which is the
yeah,
most unnatural conversation. And there's nothing that um, kind of communicates less authenticity than I'm reading from it. And again, the motivation for it is because I want to do the right thing and I want to get it right. But the feeling of I've got to get it right almost undermines my kind of what I'm actually trying to do.
yeah,
When we can just when you, if you just show up with a guide and say, you know what, I don't know much about the subject,
yeah,
so I have printed off this guide. I've got this guide handy,
yeah,
because I'm learning about it as well, and I'm learning about it from this. But I understand your experience is going to be unique to you, so I'd love to understand a bit more about it from your point of view. And again, it's just that being vulnerable yourself and saying, I don't know. And as
yeah,
soon as you are open enough to say, I don't know, or actually, you know what, I might have experience, but I know my experience will be different to your experience.
yeah,
So
yeah,
powerful.
yeah. So powerful and such a difficult thing, isn't it? To be, in that vulnerable place of,
Mm,
I don't know, but we can work it out together, or what's the next step so that we can work it out together, or what would be the ideal next step that you would really like, you know giving that power away. Say, I don't know, but you tell me what would be your ideal solution. Can't guarantee that I can get that for you, but tell me your ideal and we'll start from there. Yeah,
brilliant.
really powerful.
So, what would be your advice for people listening to this? And so what would you want them to take away and think, actually, you know what, we need to start doing this stuff differently, or I need to start thinking about something differently to do with the menopause, particularly around leadership and thinking specifically around that particular area?
Um, Generally opening the channels. How many channels have you got for somebody to tell you that they need support? Um, and how well known are those channels? Getting that out there, and if that's, can you ask for, if you're somebody that's got the well-being package and working hard to put some resources in place, and you get into the leadership meeting and you get into that room and actually talk about what you're trying to do and how you're trying to put this package together.
Mm,
How many times can you say that this package is there? So getting it known. More generally, can you open a sort of listening forum? Do you want to put together a sort of a working group of some people that have asked for support, or would like some support, and can they get together and sort of talk about what that would look like for them, so
mm,
that you're not just presuming that this is going to be the answer.
mm,
um yeah, and just, yeah, talking about it. Get the conversation, put menopause in the conversation. How can you get that into conversation more?
mm. It reminds me of that party game you can play when I've been to, where you end up and you've all given a word when you arrive, and you've got to see how many times you can get it into a
Yeah,
conversation. Although maybe a few less glasses of wine while you're doing it, in a work context. But
yeah,
yeah, but having the just it becomes a normal part of how you're doing rather than us saying, yeah, fine. It's like, well, actually, you know what?
yeah.
um, so yeah, I
And
take.
if talking about your well-being encourages other people to talk about their situation. That's brilliant. And what I would say is, don't sort of close the group off or think that you're just talking to women of a certain age, because that's not going to be the case. I talk to women in organisations that are, say, in their 20s or 30s, and they might be going through certain health conditions like endometriosis, where they're having medication that's put them into menopause. I'm talking to a lot of women that are in their 20s that are want to know about this scary thing that everybody's talking about, because there's this dread of negative narrative, and so they want to know more about the menopause. But also speak to a lot of young people that are supporting mum at home, and they want to know what's going on for mum. How can I talk to my mum about it? How can I help my mum get through this time that she's obviously finding really tricky? Might be that they've got people that they work with, and they want to know how to support them in the workplace. So it's not just you're talking to this demographic of women. There are more and more men joining support groups that I host. They want to know more, whether that's supporting somebody at home or supporting somebody in their team. So have a really broad conversation about menopause, because I think it affects everybody.
That is a brilliant place to end the conversation, Tammy. You have just like, if I was going to say, if I prepared you before this and said, can you wrap up nicely? That would have been it. Yeah, I have really found this conversation helpful, because it's for me, I'm just thinking about how it just relates to so much. Although it's a very specific topic around menopause, it relates in so many ways to so many other things I support companies with in terms of their culture, their leadership, mental well-being. Like, there are so many common threads that it really does highlight, if we can get the culture right for conversations to happen. And yes, you need, it's good to have access to specialists and or specialist knowledge and some guides and so on. And you've talked about the ones you have, and we'll put your contact details in the show notes. But actually, it comes back to thinking about your employees as people, and how to support them and show you care. So I have really enjoyed this conversation. You have added so much to it. I have loved the appearance of your son, the dog, a bird, the veg box. Keeping it real, Tammy.
My goodness, I could not have scripted it as turning up as yourself, as your everyday life throws at you all of these things. You are still here, you're still talking, you're still turning up.
Love it. Thank you so very much for your time.
Oh, so lovely to see you.
What have you taken from that conversation to think about or do differently? How has that inspired you to develop practice to bring out the best in people, including yourself? This podcast gets more listeners when people like you give a thumbs up on Apple or wherever you listen, and especially if you leave a short review. So please help be part of the movement towards creating workplaces that really provide the best experience for their people. And do reach out to me directly to discuss your challenges at work and ideas for development. If we're not already acquainted on LinkedIn, let's connect. All the links you need are in the show notes. And if you join the club, you'll be the first to hear about relevant updates and free downloadable resources that are part of developing practice and performance. Thanks for joining me today.